How we doing, guys? Everybody's good? Cool. Glad everybody's good. I'm doing great as well. So, making a short video. It might be short, it might be longer than I expect, but we'll see how detailed I get on the subject. Someone asked what all the T0s and T3s and G1Xs, whatever it is that people choose to write on their plates when you receive them. If you buy a plate from somebody, check this out first though. I made some really cool multicolored plates for the class, for the grow along I'm doing. I say for the grow along I'm doing because maybe in the future someone will watch this and they won't know what the hell I'm talking about. But for the grow along that I'm doing right now, you guys know who you are. Shout out to you guys. So Melissa actually asked me in the comments on the Mighty Network, she said, what does this mean, all these numerologies and X's and O's that are on the plates? And yeah, it's pretty confusing, especially because not everybody writes things the same. Like, I know that my system for keeping track of where I'm at on my plates is completely different. When I first started doing it, there wasn't really anything to help you keep track. There wasn't like a system to use other than you just had to use common sense to keep inventory. So, for example, this is how I do it. And I'm going to correct some things that a lot of people still get wrong. I don't know if it's because they've just never learned, because a lot of really good growers and breeders even make this mistake. If they've never learned or if they just like disagree with the notion. But anyways, this is Tap Black Cap. That's Tap Black Cap times or crossed with Jack Frost is called Blackjack. This is T3. Now the only reason I'm keeping track of transfers is because this is not a complete culture. This comes from spore. There were spores put on this plate. This is the third transfer out from there. The only reason I would ever write the number of transfers on a plate is because I'm keeping track of how many transfers I take until I isolate this multi-spore into a monoculture. So let's talk about spores for a second. When a mushroom drops its spores from the gills, right? The cap opens, the gills release spores. Let's say a spore lands here, 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 etc., and you've got 1,000 different spores, right? Each of those spores will grow mycelium, okay? But that mycelium is not complete. It needs another single spore mycelium, and these are each called monokaryons. And monokaryons will grow, like I said, and they'll live and they'll eat and they'll consume, but they won't fruit because they're only half of the genetic set that's needed to produce viable offspring, meaning to grow mushrooms and produce viable spores. So monokaryons, when one monokaryon meets with another monokaryon, they do what's called clamping. That's the process that's what we call mating, is clamping. Or you can call it mating, but clamping is the actual technical term for what actually happens. So when they clamp, now you have a dikaryon. And a dikaryon will split off into mitosis, where the cell divides and grow and eat until it eventually consumes all of its food. It says, all right, the weather's right. I'm feeling good as a block of mycelium here in this cow pie, so I'm going to go ahead and grow some mushrooms and release some spores. So now, that dikaryon is one of, say there was 1,000 monokaryons on this plate, and each of them mated and created 500 dikaryons, okay? Eventually, if I transfer this enough, I'm no longer going to have 500 dikaryons. I'm going to have only one dikaryon. That is a monoculture. That's not a monokaryon. It's a monoculture. That means there's one set of genetics in that culture that you've now grown out on here. So a multispore, so if I was to grow this out, I would get several different dikaryons battling themselves. These dicaryons are going to fight each other. That's why multispores aren't as good. You'll get way smaller flushes. Sometimes they look like this, sometimes they look like that. It's random, right? Because you never know what you're going to get, what dicaryon's going to win the battle. And this is, I mean, natural selection, right? This is how species survive. They have to battle and see which one makes it to the top of the mountain. It's the law of the jungle. So what we do as humans is we're able to look at the mycelium and the way it's growing and decide which is the healthiest and strongest part of the mycelium and isolate that away and continue to shrink the gene pool until we have one solid culture that we can grow out and keep. Now, interestingly enough, this is where I was saying people get it wrong. So this is Toke 9, okay? So Toke 9, the 9 stands, see, so here I'll use this one as an example. This will be better because this is an actual fruit that you can see. Well, you can see the fruit on there too. That was a pin transfer. This was a pin transfer. This is Kidgib F3 C2. So F3 means filial generations. When I originally made Kidgib, I crossed 2 different spores from 2 different strains of mushroom. I grew those out. Well, I grew out that mycelium. It grew into what was a fruiting culture. Well, once I took the culture from the liquid gold and bred it to the Kidgib, I immediately cloned that mushroom, the first mushroom that I saw, and now I had what's called the parent culture. Okay, that's not a filial generation. That is the parent culture. When I took spores from Kidgib and I grew them out on agar, I had now achieved the first filial generation, the F1. So then I grew that out, grew mushrooms, took spores from that. Then I had the F2, same thing here. So what does C2 mean? C2 means clone number 2. Okay, so that means I cloned something from the spores in the F3, and that was Kidgib F3 C1. Then from that clone culture, I cloned it again. Now I'm on Kidgib F3 clone number 2. Now, example, if I was to take another clone from the cloned culture from C1 that's a different mushroom than this, that would be C1 or C2-1, because it's still a second generation clone, but I would write -1 to separate it. I would never write T anything from a clone. See, people do, most of the cultures you guys get, I'd imagine if they're any good, they're clone cultures, but the cultivators are still writing T0, T1, T4, whatever, how many transfers, when it's pointless, because I'm going to tell you guys a secret. Once you clone a mushroom, you're now messing with only one dikaryon. You have a monoculture. So what would be the point in counting the transfers from an already single dikaryon, a monoculture, if you're not limiting the gene pool anymore? Now people will come on and they'll say, well, that makes no sense because sometimes it's sporadic and crazy, the mycelium, and you see sectoring. And I'm just going to say, you know what? There's a lot of things that goes on that a lot of people, I think, have a hard time wrapping their minds around. And the main thing is epigenetics. And epigenetics means, epigenetics are the genetics that are, the DNA that changes based on environmental factors to give different morphologies, okay? In cubensis and mushrooms, it's extremely unstable. If you let a culture sit in the fridge for too long and it's a monoculture, and you bust it out, good chance it's going to throw a lot of weird stuff because parts of that dikaryon haven't caught up with the part that's ready to go yet. You don't need to transfer it out for it to perform well. You could take a piece of tissue from a mushroom and put it right to liquid culture, and it will do the same thing as if you had transferred that same tissue culture out 100 times on agar, unless you factor in epigenetics, because things can change over 100 transfers, right? But ultimately, if you've done a good job at stabilizing your strain, it shouldn't make a difference. So there's no point in really counting the transfers because this is a monoculture. I hope that makes sense, guys. Example, this is C1-1. So I took another clone from the multispore, called it C1, and then from this one, I took another clone from the multispore. I saw a mushroom growing on that same plate a few weeks later that looked even better. So I have C1-1. Hope that makes sense, guys. Let me know if I'm missing anything, and much love.